Good afternoon. How are you? Well, Thomas Jefferson says the temperature is 85. It was 90 and 90 plus most of the day. The humidity 66, and it's a breezy 3.8 miles an hour in the wind. The impression I have is that the more outrageous Trump is, we have an inverse proportion to Democrats doing anything. In other words, the stronger he is, the weaker they become. And by choice, instead of fighting back. The impulse is not to fight back. Anybody who's fooled around with boxing or any sport, it's sort of like if somebody swings at you, you move your head back or you put your hand up. And that impulse is dead in America. There are those who probably have always fought for what they thought was important in America, in their personal lives, their family, their friends, their neighborhood. But we have a wealth of people who, if you want to run people out of the country, it's the ones that don't want to fight to keep it. And we have an outrageous number of people in high positions who have platforms, who could fight back and don't. D.C. is the best example of that, I suppose. But let's consider the lack of character of felon Trump for a few moments. They say that he wants the Smithsonian exhibits to fit Trump's view of history. I didn't know he read history. I don't think he knows history. I think he knows the con. I think he knows brutality. I think he knows revenge. I think he is basically, if anybody could give him a truth serum, a very unhappy person who strikes out at others and has proven himself to be a psycho. And this is the guy we have in the White House. Never before we had a person with his convictions, and I'm talking about his criminal convictions, proven in court to abuse women, admitted to the worst kind of conduct, I'll grab you or whatever. And this guy is the president of a country that claims exceptionalism. Is this an example of how we're better than everybody else in the world when you have that? Yeah, sure. Trump is interested in reading page 6 of the Washington Post to see what they're saying about him. And he's issued a statement what he expects to happen at the Smithsonian. Restoring truth and sanity to American history. You know, Mussolini couldn't say it better. Here's a truth for you, felon Trump. The core inflation, this is a BLS statistic, by the way. Core inflation rises most in 6 months. And this is all because of the tariff driving the price concerns. So there you have it. He loves tariffs. Why does he love tariffs? He loves tariffs because it puts money in the U.S. bank, but it takes the money out of your house to pay for higher prices for the goods you're going to be buying because of the tariffs. Isn't that something? So, inflation is not a mystery, it's a fact. The federal target about inflation is to keep it, 2 or below. And the prices in June were 2.9, inflation was up, and in July it was 3.1. So there's a proposal today that the new fanatic they're going to put in at the Bureau of Labor Standards, instead of having a professional who has the experience and knows what the numbers mean, and that these numbers are used for our businesses and persons to make plans, well, maybe they won't publish those. The ostrich theory. If you don't know what the truth is, you don't know how we're doing, que sera. The Texas Dems are returning to Texas after the special session ends, and they may go forward and do more of this. that is fighting it that way. My view is these tactics are lazy, mentally, politically. They're not brazen, they're not forceful, they don't make the point. And so how would I make the point? When somebody goes, in Texas says, I'm going to revise the lines so that we, a party, sees, name your number, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 seats. Now some Republicans aren't happy with that because in order to make that work, they have to make some Republicans who are incumbents at risk, and they don't want to do that. And nor do those Republicans, I bet. But why aren't we in court saying this is racist? Why aren't we in court saying it violates the Voting Rights Act? Why aren't we saying this is not equal justice before the law? Why is it that this is not an argument in a courtroom? And I do not like a kind of Las Vegas wheel in which we're now going to spin the precincts and draw lines to satisfy an outcome instead of voters in fairly drawn districts. That is, they abut upon each other, they make sense given the terrain, they make sense given the history, and they're not gerrymandered. That is, they don't run up and down streets to pick 5 voters here and 5 voters there to determine the outcome of the election. It's supposed to be an election. We choose. But if the legislature is choosing before the people get to choose, how is that constitutional? How is that right? How does that not violate the Voting Rights Act? Tell me. I want to know. Now, since we're very anxious about having agents who know not a damn thing about criminal prosecution, say the National Guard, for example, and the FBI, I don't know, if they sit at a desk. Have you ever seen an FBI agent undercover? They take off their tie. They don't wear those black shoes. It's because a lot of their investigations are kind of, I don't know, old school detective work with new tools. And the notion of putting them on the street and that they're going to make a difference in crime, it's a bizarre idea. What they're really there to do is to be racist and to add credence to Trump's tyrannical objective to be the dictator of America. That's it. And you know, all this money is splashing around. See what he's doing with it. Spending it on officers, spending it on investigations, spending it on prisons. The private prisons are making big profits now. I mentioned once before Ira Robbins, who's followed this problem, and I don't know if he's writing about it now, but it's probably tempting if he has any time to do it. And there's the Geo group and the Core Civi group, and these two are making a lot of money. In fact, the last quarter, Core Civi got $538 million, and I think that was an increase of 14%. So there's increased revenue for new prisons, and the money comes from the families and so forth. And we deny children food, SNAP, perhaps a home, health care, so we can spend that money that we don't give children to build prisons. Makes sense, huh? And then we have tariffs, which increase the U.S. government's bank, but you and I, as the consumers, we pay the price on the goods. So we are being taxed and directly helping the government with these ridiculous tariffs to be wealthy itself at our expense. But that's Trump. That's the way he does everything. And the unimaginable, well, certainly before Trump, it would be that people would vote for a guy who said, I'm going to do tariffs. And this is the problem about the ignorance of the voters. Yes, we have ignorant voters out there. I don't know how many, I don't know what proportion, but that people couldn't appreciate that by voting for Trump, they were going to increase what they were going to pay out of pocket, having less of an allowance at home for what they needed, whether it be for the children, food, housing, education, medicine, these things. So what we have is we've created prisons, and we celebrate that. Why? Because we have a vengeful, terrorizing president who doesn't give a shit about anybody. He cares about them. He loves prejudice. He embraces hate and hurt. He's right there on top of that kind of stuff. But anything else? Take an example. What could be so upsetting to someone than the hopeless, the homeless? That's interesting. That was a slip, but isn't that a right feeling now? When we have a whole country turned against people who are homeless rather than helping them. And Trump has said that if the homeless refuse to cooperate with Trump, they may go to jail. Now, don't you love that? To punish them for being poor, basically. There was a case in the 60s, Robinson against California, the Supreme Court, and they found it was unconstitutional to criminalize drug addiction. And my question is, what about criminalizing poverty? How could you have someone in this situation and say, you're homeless and I'm going to pile on, and if you don't do what I tell you and, go to some farmland somewhere, that I'm going to put you on a bus and send you there. It's just, I guess we're lucky they don't just throw them in the water 100 miles offshore. These people are terrible, absolutely terrible. And nobody's upset, nobody's outraged about it. And there is an accusation that the media is not covering the protests that do exist, and there's evidence of that. And you hear members of Congress and others saying, oh yeah, no, we had a problem with crime in Washington, and this is good. Well, yeah, really? If I get one of those cases, I'm going to charge that they didn't have the jurisdiction, the authority, to make an arrest. I'm sure they'll make lots of wrong arrests. I'm sure there will be incidents without their experience, because they're not law enforcement, that will go wrong. They violate the Constitution, posse comitatus. How about that? They are doing law enforcement within our borders. They're not supposed to do it in or out of the nation. You would think a felon like Trump would be more thoughtful toward how he went after people on the street. But you see, he doesn't care. He is the guy that thought Charlottesville was okay, now doing it in D.C. I'm surprised he didn't go to Charlottesville first and say, oh, there's problems down there, we got to take care of it. And he's going to say it about New York and Chicago and San Francisco and New Orleans and wherever else he thinks is a place for Democrats. He's running his campaign now. I think he's running the campaign to be a dictator. Not to win midterm elections, not to win the presidential election, although I think he thinks if he manages this right, he can run again. He's setting up a situation in which what he's doing is introducing martial law in the absence of any legal authority, any factual basis for doing so. That's what he's doing. The White House made 23 arrests Monday night. Now, when I say they made, I don't know who made it. Was it made by the local police? Was it made by the FBI? Why are we in this box? Those of you within the sound of my voice who are in the National Guard and were not trained before you went into the National Guard how to enforce the laws, how to conduct an investigation or arrest, scream quietly that you weren't trained at all. And if you were out there, how would you feel about obeying an order to become a law enforcement officer when they barely teach you enough to be a soldier? And don't tell me that's bullshit. It's absolutely true. So that's one of the things that we have to think about. The real risk here is not our safety of our streets. The real risk here is the march toward a dictatorship. And the cowards abound. Why are people spending so much time arguing whether or not they can justify Trump's declaration of a war against crime? From the time I was a prosecutor in the 70s until now, I have never seen any perfect system to guarantee law, order, security, and justice. And I don't expect before my coil runs out that I will see that. But what we try to do is the best that we can. And when I say we try to do that, I imagine that I and others in courtrooms and special panels and legislative discussions about rules and laws that used to matter, we bring to bear our experience and try to force the system to be some approximation of fair, of just, of something we could be proud of. But to the world, we mock the notion that we are special in any fashion, unless it is how we could crush a dream by a man who distorted the election process between mountains of lies and a shill game of electoral votes to become president again, so that all the crimes and all the things that he's done in the past won't hold him back, and that he will have the nerve to seek vengeance about anyone who ever criticized him or said anything that could justify a fair person saying, that guy really effed up. So, that's what I have to say, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow from my Cathedral of Trees. All the best. Bye-bye.